Welcome to Sobol Says for Parshas Noach. I guess kind of welcome back. The Yom Tovim are over and we go back to our normal crazy now with this Parsha. It begins the quote-unquote year. And first and foremost, I want to say that this class is dedicated in memory of my father, Reb Shlomo Mordechai ben Reb Yaakov Sobol, on the occasion of his 14th Yortzeit, which will be this Sunday night, Monday, the 3rd of Cheshvan. May his neshama have an aliyah from the Torah we learned today. Please also join me at the Shtibel this Shabbos. If you're seeing this in another country or even in another state, you're more than welcome, but I'll understand if you cannot show up. But otherwise, this Shabbos at Shalosh Shudas, I'll be making a siyum in my father's memory, and we'll be sharing some Divrei Torah then as well. So since everyone knows the story of the flood, spoiler alert, it rains a lot, and then we are saved. I thought today I would just share a few tidbits, then perhaps we'll suggest a daring chiddush, and then we'll end off with an idea and a story about my father. So there's a very powerful message for us that we can learn from the Teva, the ark. As you know, the name of the ark is Teva. That's how we say it. So we know it tells us in Pirkei Avos, B'asara ma'amaros ha'olam nivra. With 10 utterances, with 10 sayings, the world was created. Hashem, Kavayachol, so to speak, chose speech as the method with which to create the world, and therefore speech is that which must be most heavily guarded. As we've said before, in a nod to Chinese philosophy, which I do not know very much about, and I certainly do not certify it, but they definitely have a Torah true concept, which is that of the yin-yang, which means the more powerful a force going in one direction, the equally powerful force goes in the opposite direction. Therefore, because speech is the most creative force known to mankind, and we know that simply because Hashem chose to use speech with which to create the world. Therefore, it has an equally great destructive force, and we therefore must guard our speech as much as we possibly can. So we know that Hashem created the world with speech. But what happened? What happened at the flood? Was the speech, so to speak, washed away? Was that whole concept eradicated now that there was a fresh new world? So it's interesting to note that speech may have been one of the unadvertised passengers on the ark. And because, as we said, the word for ark in Hebrew is teva. Now, interestingly, the word in Hebrew for word is teva as well. Teva means word. So, and I believe it's the Lubavitcher Rebbe that points out that the measurements of the ark further bear out that idea. The measurements of the ark were as follows. It was almost 30 cubits high. It was 300 cubits long, and it was 50 cubits wide. You can trust me, or you can just look in the text and it will bear that out. Now, what is the gematria of that, or rather, what do those numbers represent in terms of letters? So 30, that is the letter Lamed. 300, that is the letter Shin, its gematria is 300. And 50 is the letter Nun. Therefore, we have Lamed, Shin, Nun, which spells Lashon, which is tongue or language. So we see clearly that the table was not only the word, but the whole idea of language and the power of the speech was preserved through the teva, based on both its name as well as its measurements. And clearly speech, with its creative or destructive power, needed to come along for the ride, because that is the key to the entire world. When used improperly, there is nothing more destructive, and when used properly through Torah and tefillah and kind words, it can build worlds. Which leads us to an interesting medrash that Rashi brings down. If you turn to page, let's see, 40, they're so Small the numbers now compared to just a couple of weeks ago. If you turn to page 36, Pasuk 7. What's happening at this point is now the flood itself, the rains have ended, and they are now waiting for the waters to recede enough that they can disembark. And so, of course, very famously, Noach sends out the raven in order to test the waters, or rather test that there are no waters. And the pasuk says as follows: Vayishalach es ha'orev vayetze yatso vashov ad yevoshes hamayim me'al haaretz. So he sent out the raven, that's Noach, and it kept going and returning until the waters dried from upon the earth. Says Rashi on this, very curious Rashi, very surprising one actually. Yatso vashov, that it was going and returning. Holech umakif sevivos hateva, velo halach b'shlichuso. So it was just making like circles around the ark, and it wasn't going out on its mission. Why? Shahaya choshto al bas zugo. Because it was concerned about its mate, which is based on the medrash that tells us that the raven, as insane as this may sound, although I guess maybe this medrash was much more shocking up until about 10 years ago, but the raven was concerned that the reason why Noach was sending him out on the mission was so that it would leave his wife on the ark in order for Noach to be able to have relations with his wife. And that's what the Medrash says. Insane about until 10 years ago, now just hopefully still ridiculous. But nonetheless, that's a hard Medrash to understand. Noach is sending the raven, and the raven is suspicious he chose him because Noach wanted to pair with his mate. So was that even a possibility? I mean, was that really a concern? So the Marshal gives us an insight into that. He tells us that the ravens were very lascivious creatures. I find, because I'm a lifelong Pittsburgh Steelers fan, I find any opportunity to say negative things about ravens to be particularly delicious, but nonetheless. Ravens are very lascivious creatures, as they are constantly having relations with their mate. As a matter of fact, we know there were only 3 beings that violated the edict on the ark. The edict was, the whole time they were there, no one was allowed to have relations with their mate. The only 3 to violate that were the dog, the raven, and Ham, the son of Noach. Those were the only 3 to violate that, and the Gemara goes at length to explain what their punishments were for that. But nonetheless, we see the raven was a very lascivious creature. What the Marshal introduces is something that today we consider to be, we think of this as a newly thought of idea in psychology, the idea of projection, but in fact, the Marshal was onto this centuries ago, and he tells us that the raven, because it's such a lascivious creature, it imputed to others that which was a flaw in itself. And therefore, because the raven was so obsessed with having relations all the time, it therefore became suspicious of Noach that would be his agenda as well. And we really need to learn an important lesson from that, of course, because we often impute bad motives or actions to other people when in fact that is merely a reflection of ourselves, right? When we tend to say, oh, did you see that guy making chit-chat with that person at the head of the line? You know why they're doing that? They're trying to cut the line. I know it. That's what turns out. It was a long-lost friend from 20 years ago that they're seeing for the first time. That's why they weren't together, whatever the case may be. But if you're a line cutter, that's going to be your first assumption, because that's what I would do. So I assume that's what that guy is doing as well. So what seems like an insane medrash really contains a very valuable lesson for all of us. Let's not go imputing our own character flaws on other people. Oftentimes they're doing something quite innocent, and it's really the viewer, ourselves, that is the one that has the improper character. Now let's move on to the star of the Parsha himself, Noach. So some years we defend Noach and speak of his righteousness, even compared to others in other generations. The most often cited one is he versus Abraham. Other years, like this one, we focus more on his failings than his righteousness. So of course, having just discussed the lesson of the raven, we want to make sure that we are not projecting, and certainly when speaking of biblical characters, we must bear in mind that we view things only through our weak lenses, but nonetheless, and therefore we should make sure that the things we are using as a critique of those characters are not simply a reflection of our own flaws, but nonetheless, the Torah very clearly sets out the character flaws in all of our progenitors, even the great saintly ones, our patriarchs, etc. And therefore it does it so we can understand that they are humans just like we are. We can aspire to the greatness just like they did. So therefore we have to be mindful, but nonetheless there is clearly an invitation specifically with Noach that we assess his character to understand, because clearly he is somewhat of a flawed character. So it seems that at some point things start to go very downhill for Noach. So if you turn to page 42, Pasuk 20, this is a post-flood incident. It's quite famous, perhaps infamous actually, and we'll begin with the pasuk that introduces it to us. Pasuk 20. Vayachel Noach ish ha'adama vayita karem. And Noach, the man of the earth, debased himself and planted a vineyard. So what is this term, vayichal, debasing? So vayichal, Rashi tells us what that means. Let's see. Vayichal. Asa atzmo chulin. He made himself mundane, non-holy. Because really he should have started out with a different kind of planting. In other words, don't pick grapes as the first thing to plant so you can get drunk. That's what it's telling us. Now, Rashi is telling us, it comes from the word chulin, which means non-holy, not unholy, right? Unholy has a purely negative connotation. This just means non-holy. Chulin is traditionally used when speaking contra karbanos, contra truma. So you have food that is chulin, mundane, that which we all eat, and then you have food which is kadosh, holy, like a sacrifice, like truma. Those are things that had additional laws attendant to them, such as someone needed to be pure when they ate them. That's the difference. But chulin in and of itself is not a negative terminology. It just means non-holy. Now the implication, together with the use of ish ha'adamah, though, you see, that seemed to be a little jab at Noach. You call him a man of the earth, you know. Now we can use that as a compliment sometimes, you know, like he's a real down-to-earth, salt of the earth man. But that's not what they mean over here. They mean he became a man of the earth, chulin, as opposed to something holy. So it's clearly a criticism of Noach. So here it was, he had the opportunity to plant a crop and he plants grapes first. Perhaps not the best priority. Now the truth is, clearly he didn't know about other uses of other crops, because if he had been really smart, he should have planted wheat or potatoes. I mean, he could have made vodka out of those or a good scotch and still been planting in the proper order, but that's for another time. Nonetheless, he plants grapes right away. So why was that such a bad thing to do? So we see that here he had witnessed the total destruction of the earth and mankind. And the first thing he does is plant a vineyard and get drunk. He lost his priorities. That was not the rebuilding of the world needed at that moment. That was not the moment to kick back and have a drink. That was the moment to start getting the new world going again. But I noticed that there were two prior uses of that very word, vayachal, vav yud ches lamed, in this week's Parsha before this very use. Only there they are seemingly meaning something completely different. The first one is on page 38, Pasuk 10. Now here is, again, similar to what we were speaking of before with the raven. Now Noach is waiting again for a sign for him to come out of the ark. And it says, Vayachel od shivas yamim acherim, vayosef shalach es hayona min hateva. So now he's given up on the raven, and it says he waited again another 7 days, and again sent out the dove from the ark. Now, they say Vayachel over here means waited, not like later on where they said it meant chulin, mundane, non-holy. And the reason why our scroll says that is none other than Rashi himself on Vayachel. It says Lashon Hamtana. It's a language of waiting. So Rashi, noting again an unusual word to be used in that context, tells us Vayachel means waiting. Okay, 2 psukim later, again, Noach is waiting some more because still the water is not fully receded. Vayiyochel od shivas yamim acherim vayishalach es hayona v'lo yasva shuv elav od. And he waited again another 7 days and sent the dove forth, and it did not return to him again. Again over there, Rashi says Vayiyochel. He goes out of his way to tell us who lashon Vayachel. It is also the same word as Vayachel. It means waited. So, let's review. First it says that he waited for the Yonah. Then it says 2 psukim later, he made himself wait again. It's right, it's the grammar is really, he made himself wait again, another 7 days. And then, third use of the term later on, he debased himself. So what is the connection between these 3 uses of the term Vayachel? So if you ponder Noach's name, we can begin to see the answer. What does Noach mean? It means to rest. Simply put, it means rest. It is clear from the very beginning, all Noach wanted to do was rest. Take a break. He was tired. He spent 120 years building the ark. And then another year on the ark, continually taking care of all the animals, basically 24/7. He was done. All he dreamed about was resting. Taking it easy, having a few drinks, and that may be alluded to at the end of the Teva experience when he sent out the dove. Vayachel. He waited. What was he waiting for? Vayachel, to debase himself, to go back to being a regular guy, to taking it easy, to have a few drinks. But we need to be careful what we wish for. Because the story of Noach is almost lahavdil, like those star athletes or child movie stars that peak too early in their lives. When the applause stops, when the music stops, when they finally get their moments to rest that they had dreamed of for years, what happens? They start to debase themselves. They start getting into trouble. That's when the problems begin. That's when the embarrassments begin. Think about Noach. He peaked too early. He had spent those 121 years active. He was the man. All action was surrounding Noach. But did you know that he lives for another 350 years after the flood? 350 years. Yet, we never hear from him again. That's it. He's out of the story. He peaks, he exits the teva, gets drunk, exits stage left. That's what happens with Noach. He fades into history with an ignominious end. Drunk, castrated by his own son, and then nothing more. He no longer had a purpose. Those dreams he had had for so many years of calm and quiet and inactivity were his downfall. And that is a tremendous lesson for us. That's the American dream, right? Retire early, putter around the house, drive your spouse crazy. By contrast, let us look at another character in Tanakh who we can make an argument could be a Gilgul of Noach, a reincarnation of Noach. And he certainly may have done a tikkun for him. Now, of course, we cannot just go around saying somebody is a Gilgul of somebody else without having sources for it. And I have not yet found a source for this, which probably means I just have not looked hard enough. I would be surprised if there is no one that says this, but that's not important. The sentiment is correct, and the lessons we can learn from it as well. Actually, the Mefarshim say that Moshe was a Gilgul of Noach. Just so you know, many Mefarshim point out, based on certain similarities, or rather opposites, they go in opposite directions. Noach is first called, the first pasuk of Noach, Parshas Noach, is Eile Toldos Noach, Noach ish tzadik haya b'dorasav. He was a completely righteous man. Yet, as you know, as I pointed out, when it says Vayichal, it calls him an Ish Ha'adamah, a man of the earth. He had gone from Ish Tzadik to Ish Ha'adamah. By contrast, Moshe is first called an Ish Mitzri. He's first called an Egyptian man. And by the end, he's called Ish Elokim, the man of God. Clearly a promotion. But there's another character in Tanakh who, when we contrast him with Noach, makes for some interesting material. Again, I can't say it's so, but let's look at this. So first we said Noach was tired. His name means rest. And we noted he started off things with a bang, but ended with a whimper. Wine is what ultimately leads to his downfall, and he debases himself when he's drunk. And one more thing to note, when he is on the teva, the lion gets angry with him for being late with his food, says the Medrash. And, I would just give a smaller tip, 10%, 5%. What does the lion do? He whacks Noach, says the Gemara, thereby giving Noach a limp for the rest of his life. By contrast, there is someone in Tanakh who is as active and energetic as it gets. He ends off with a bang instead of a whimper. He abstains from wine, and he also has a limp, but he kills a lion. Anyone? I guess that doesn't work as well when it's not a live audience. Yes, the answer is Shimshon. It's striking how opposite Shimshon is of Noach. It's as if Shimshon is a tikkun for Noach, which is why we could perhaps suggest that he is a Gilgul. He constantly fights against the Plishtim. Instead of going out with a whimper, his greatest act is the one that ends his life when he brings down the stadium full of Plishtim, the exact opposite of Noach. His final greatest moment is his last one. And of course, as a Nazir, he abstained from wine his whole life. And the Gemara in Sota tells us that he had a limp. Actually, it says he had a limp in both legs, which I never quite understood what that means. I don't know how somebody could have a limp in both legs, but the Gemara says it. Yet even with those limps, he is able to kill a lion, perhaps as a tikkun for Noach. So that sure sounds like he did everything possible. And then just as an aside, make of it as you wish, In this week's Parsha, in Noach, seemingly completely unrelated, we learn, based on Rashi, that when Hashem restricts, he actually gives us permission to eat animals, and then he restricts certain things such as blood. And in one of the psukim, says Rashi, we learn from there the prohibition against suicide. That therefore the Torah otherwise does not explicitly say somebody cannot take their own life. In this week's Parsha, in fact, Rashi tells us, based on the fact that you cannot spill your blood, it says that it's referring to suicide, which is interesting to note as well, because though clearly warranted, Shimshon did commit suicide. He committed a final act that he was certain would kill him, although he was going to be killed shortly anyway. But it's shocking how many connections there are between the two. But if that is not enough, let's look at the raison d'etre. Do you know what Shimshon's father's name was? We'll make that a rhetorical question here because you can't respond to me. His father's name was Manoach, which can also be read Mi Noach, from Noach. So I'm just saying, that's an unbelievable set of parallels between the two of them. In any event, the lesson to be learned from Shimshon, as opposed to Noach, is that we always want to go out with a bang, not a whimper. My father, Olav Shalom, who worked into his 80s, would always say to retire is to expire. And that is the message, although it seems to crush our dreams of early retirement. That is not what you want. You don't want to be a Noach. You don't want your greatest days to be in the middle of your life and then just fade into ignominy. You want to be active, to be productive till your final moments. Now, speaking of my dad, that was a cheap segue, I know, but let us end off with the following thought and story. Coming back, or really going to the beginning of the Parsha, because we never really touched on it, the first pasuk is a grammarian's nightmare. It says, Eile toldos Noach, Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'dorosav, es ha'elohim hisalech Noach. Said more summarily, these are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. Noach walked with God. Now, obviously, this is a highly inefficient pasuk. There is absolutely no need to mention Noach's name 3 times in that one pasuk. You could simply have said, these are the generations of Noach, who was a righteous man, perfect in his generation, and walked with God. No need for 3 Noachs in that sentence. So why does the Torah choose to put Noach's name in the pasuk 3 times? So before we answer that, let's just contemplate one other famous pasuk. The second peculiar and quite well-known pasuk can be found, and when I say it's quite well-known, it's because we just discussed it like 10 minutes ago, is the pasuk we previously referenced, Vayachel Noach ish ha'adama vayita karem, that Noach debased himself and he planted a vineyard. As we said, Rashi noted the odd terminology of Vayachel to teach us that he made himself mundane, chulin, by choosing to plant grapes for wine first before anything else. Now, besides the obvious question of which we dealt with somewhat as to the use of that term, the other question was, what exactly did Noach do that was so wrong? Okay, I get it. Having a drink definitely shouldn't have been the very first thing. Although I'll be honest with you, think about what he had just been through, right? He's mocked by his neighbors for 119 and a half years while he's building the ark. You understand, Noach is the very first guy in Times Square with the sandwich board over him saying the end is near, right? I mean, before all those guys, there was Noach. Everybody else is going around having a great evil time, and he is saying the end is near, the end is near. And they are having fun with him and mocking him. Okay, by the time he's proven right, not much time to enjoy it. Everyone dies very quickly. Then, as we said, he's on the ark for an entire year, a slave to all the animals, just feeding them. So let me ask you something. After all of that, who wouldn't want to have a drink? I mean, I have a slightly bumpy day and I'd like to have a drink. I don't understand why would that be such a criticism of him. I mean, he put in a lot of work, a lot of effort. He went through a lot of aggravation. Okay, so you know what I'm saying? It's not so crazy. Not to mention the fact that he saw the entire world destroyed. Everything he knew, gone. A little drink is not so crazy. So the Medrash Tanchuma, in commenting on the mention of Noach's name 3 times in that first pasuk, says that those 3 mentions correspond to the 3 stages of the world that Noach had witnessed. The first was the world in its glory before the destruction, as well as its downward spiral. He was also alive in the time when not everyone was yet evil. The world was still a very good place. He then experiences the downward spiral. And then the second thing is the Mabul, the destruction itself. And the third is referencing the world after the destruction and its ultimate return to glory. 3 stages: glory, destruction, and then the rebuilding of glory. What the Medrash Tanchuma is telling us is that Noach was special. He was singular. Rare is the person who is zocha to see the world in its glory, its destruction, and then its glory again. That is very, very rare. So I once heard an explanation from Rabbi Frand in the name of Rav Simcha Wasserman Zatzal. Rav Simcha Wasserman was the son of Rav Elchanan Wasserman Zatzal, and he used to speak about this concept in more modern terms. Rav Wasserman lived in Europe before the Shoah and saw Eastern Europe in all of its glory in terms of the great yeshivas that had been established there and had been going for hundreds of years. He also lived through the Holocaust and witnessed the death of his father, Rav Elchanan Wasserman. And then ultimately he was zocha to survive and make his way to America and then Eretz Yisrael, where he helped establish many yeshivas. He tells a story about when he was a young man learning in Telz, which was in Lithuania, and one summer evening he went for a walk. For those who don't know where Lithuania is, it's extremely north in Eastern Europe. It is almost at the level of the Scandinavian countries. And if you know anything about the summers there, right, the days are extremely, extremely long, and the summer nights extremely short. So one evening when he went for a walk, he was on a vista, and he was able to turn in one direction, and he could see the sun setting. He was then able to actually turn in another area and see that it was nighttime already. And then in a third area, he could see the sun was already coming up. Something I have never seen such a thing, but he was able to see that. He, at one time, therefore, saw the sun setting, nightfall, and the sun rising. He poignantly notes that he considered that a metaphor for his experience in Europe. He had seen its sunset toward the end of its days of all the great yeshivas that were there. He saw its destruction. And then he had seen the re-glorification with the rebuilding of yeshivas and Jewish life in America and Eretz Yisrael. He says that people that went through that experience were singular people who were zocha to witness all 3 stages as Noach had. They saw the destruction, they saw the glory, they saw the destruction, and they saw the beginning of the rebuilding of the glory again. And that brings us to the second pasuk that we spoke of previously, whereby the Torah states that Noach made himself chulin, mundane. Why was Noach criticized in such a way? What the Torah is trying to tell us is that people such as Noach, who have gone through the experiences he had of seeing the glory, the destruction, and then the opportunity to rebuild the glory again, are kadosh. They are holy. They are forbidden from making themselves chulin. They are not like everyone else. They have been given this rare experience in order that they take it upon themselves to rebuild and re-glorify. Whereas for anyone else who would do what Noach did, it would not be such a bad thing. Yes, we would have a drink in such a situation, at least if we've had a rough couple of years. But for Noach, it was a total failure. He was kadosh, and he made himself chulin. He made himself mundane and regular, just like everyone else. He missed the whole point of the unique experience that he had. He was supposed to rebuild and re-glorify, not think about himself and wallow in his own misery of the experience. That was true for Noach, and that was true for those individuals who were zocha to see the three stages of glory, destruction, and glory in modern times. My father, Olav Shalom, was one of those special people, and he understood. He dedicated his post-Europe life to rebuilding. He understood that he was kadosh, and he could not make himself chol. He realized he was special and had been given the zchus to survive in order that he could see to the rebuilding. He never sat around feeling sorry for himself. He knew he had a job to do, and he did it. He built a shul, a mikvah, and he supported many Torah institutions. My father had met the Chafetz Chaim. He had met Rav Shimon Shkop when he was a child. He had seen the glory of the tzaddikim that lived in pre-war Europe. My father also witnessed the destruction firsthand as a soldier in the Russian army in World War II, which he ended up being the only survivor of his entire family. And finally, after making it to America, my father was zoche to have met Rav Aaron Kotler and to have had relationships with Rav Moshe Feinstein and the Bostoner Rebbe, Zechreinu Livracha. It is with the foregoing in mind that may help explain exactly what happened the first time my father met the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This story was told to me a number of years ago by Rabbi Yaska Gopin, the head of the Chabad in West Hartford, Connecticut, where my parents lived for many years. I was from there as well, and in whose Chabad house we davened in for a number of years. Of course, I was not present for this story, but this is how he relayed it to me. So quite a number of years ago, he took my father with a small group of people to meet with the Rebbe before Rosh Hashanah. Now, from what he explained, whereas normally it was quite a festive mood by the Rebbe, before Rosh Hashanah, the atmosphere was generally more solemn. It was not the same festive feeling, but rather the Rebbe set the mood in a more somber and solemn setting, understanding what was coming soon, that of Yom Hadin, the Judgment Day. So there were a number of people there, and my father, whom no one had ever accused of being an introvert, went over to the Rebbe and said loudly in Yiddish, "I get such nachas, such hana'ah from seeing a Jew such as you." Now, that was unusual to say the least. People didn't just go over to the Rebbe in such a friendly way and speak like that. But my father was not a regular person. Rabbi Gopin said that his heart stopped for a moment at that time, and the room became silent, and everybody waited and watched for the Rebbe's reaction. The Rebbe was in one place in his solemn mood. My father, very jovial, very happy, comes over to him and says, "Ich hab nachas from Jer. I get great nachas from you." Apparently the Rebbe started smiling and clapping his hands, and everybody followed suit, and the atmosphere became festive. Rabbi Gopin said he breathed a sigh of relief, but found the whole incident enigmatic. He could not understand exactly what had just happened. He, as well as everybody else, was very surprised by the Rebbe's reaction. Not that, God forbid, the Rebbe would lose his temper or anything like that, but it might be a moment for the Rebbe to indicate or just ignore it, whatever the case may be. But I think I understand what happened, and it's based on everything I've said to you today. The Rebbe clearly understood, especially with my father's thick accent. My father had such a thick Polish accent. He was so clearly an immigrant, a greener. He understood where my father came from, and based on my father's age, he could understand what he had been through. He understood what my father intended by his statement. He was saying, I saw the glory. I saw the destruction. And now, when I see a tzaddik like you, I know that I was zocheh to see the glory again. I know that even if not complete, me and my generation have done their part in helping the rebuilding and reglorification. So I get great nachas when I see someone like you. I think the Rebbe fully understood that, and that was cause for joy. And so I hope and I pray that as we begin this new year, we will be zocheh to complete the task, the rebuilding of our world that the prior generation began. Then we will be able to truly sit down and have a celebratory drink as we dine at the Sudas Mashiach B'mhera B'yameinu. Amen. Good Shabbos.